Changing a country isn't easy, but change is inevitable, and the choices we make today will shape our country for generations to come. That's why we've published our first book from Australia Institute Press. What's the Big Idea offers 32 ideas for a better Australia, from leading thinkers such as Bob Brown, Sally McManus, Dr. Emma Shortis, and Professor Brian Schmidt. The essays are a roadmap and a reminder that the solutions exist. Australia just needs the courage to implement them. Visit australiainstitute.org.au or follow the link in the show notes to order your copy of What's the Big Idea today.
What is the key thing that actually needs to happen here to protect the skate?
We need to stop fish farming in Macquarie Harbour. It's quite simple.
One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute. Tasmania's salmon industry is coming under increasing scrutiny after hundreds of thousands of fish died in a mass kill event, which resulted in dead fish washing up on the state's beaches south of Hobart.
A swell of opposition from sand to sea.
Live salmon being siphoned out of a pen and sealed away with dead salmon. It's a vision that's alarmed the RSPCA.
Oily chunks washing up on this very beach after an unprecedented mass salmon die-off event due to a bacterial outbreak.
The workers aren't at fault here, it's the big corporate bosses who are at fault and the political establishment who for decades have allowed big corporations to effectively self-regulate. That's the problem here, it's state capture.
Harrowing vision of fish being dumped into bins or landfill, or even worse, diseased fish dying in farm pens and then just staying there with the remaining fish, has angered those who've been calling out the damage commercial fish farming does in Tassie's pristine waterways for years. But while fish were washing up in beaches on one side of the state, on the other side of the state, a battle is raging over the future of the Maugean skate, an extraordinary stingray-like creature with links to the dinosaur era. The skate is on the verge of extinction thanks to the damage being wreaked by commercial salmon farming in Macquarie Harbour, home to the planet's only skate community. And there's a big political angle to Tasmania's salmon debate as well. The salmon lobby is powerful and has been repeatedly called out, exaggerating the size of its workforce and its supposed benefit to the state's economy. Joining me to break down all that's happening in this arena is Director of the Australia Institute in Tasmania, Eloise Carr. Thanks for joining me, Eloise.
Good morning, Ebony.
So I actually want to start with the fish kill because it's the most pressing issue that's happening at the moment. Can you just tell us a little bit about what's been unfolding in Tasmania's waters?
So a month ago now, we started having chunks of fish wash up on beaches just south of Hobart. This is initially reported by locals walking on the beach in the morning with their dogs, that kind of thing. That was the first we knew about it. And then we had an image from a tip that went viral on social media and was unverified until the Bob Brown Foundation put a drone up in the air and actually captured some footage of what is going on and what is still going on. We understand now, a month later, that the entire D'Entrecasteaux Channel has this disease. It's a rickettsia bacteria. It's also in fish farms off the Tasman Peninsula, and it is continuing to kill fish. Some estimates are upwards of 1 million fish have died, and it has also become very clear just how little is known about what is going on by the regulators.
And when you talked about that footage from the Bob Brown Foundation and the tip, this is a podcast, but can you just explain what that footage looked like? What did they manage to capture with that drone footage?
The tip image was of a vast number of fish being tipped into a hole in the ground, essentially, quite a significant sized hole in the ground with obviously thousands of fish being dumped into it. The aerial footage from drones from the Bob Brown Foundation included several hours worth of footage where tip trucks were tipping bins of fish into larger skip bins full of fish and then taking them away. And apparently this footage just goes on for hours. Other footage we've seen is of actual chunks of fish carcasses washing up on pristine beaches on Bruny Island, for example, which is a tourist destination, an iconic part of Tasmania, absolutely pristine wild beaches of Bruny Island, and they have literal carcasses of salmon washing up on their shores.
Images of rotting dead salmon, images of live fish being thrown carelessly into bins and suffocating to death is not what they market to the public.
Yeah, and so tell me about the impact on locals there. You talked about that they were the first ones to kind of discover this mass fish kill event. How is it impacting people down there?
Well, I'm sure everyone knows Tassie's quite a cold place. So summers are very short and very precious. Now, we've had a number of some of our best summer weekends where locals have not been able to go and swim at their local beaches, walk their dogs, do their normal thing for exercise and solace and restoration and relaxation because the beaches have fatty chunks washing up on their shores.
Ugh,
and we
gross.
now know that testing has been done and those chunks contain antibiotics.
And presumably the antibiotics are what's being used to try and control this disease, but it's washing up basically on the shores of public beaches, essentially.
That's right. I think we don't have all the details, but from what is publicly available, they've tried to treat the disease and that is failing completely. And as a result, we now have antibiotics in the environment. And no doubt native fish are eating some of those antibiotics.
And you talked about the fact that the regulators haven't exactly been upfront. What has been the response from regulators in Tasmania?
It's been very poor. It's become very clear the Environmental Protection Authority gave an interview. First of all, they didn't provide an update. And then when they were hassled, they finally provided an update. No beaches have been closed, by the way. They just say have a shower if you go for a swim and end up stinking like rotting fish. It's become very clear that they are not responsible and are therefore not monitoring all sorts of things. For example, they do not regulate stocking density. And if they're not regulating that, then no one is. There's been a lot of questions asked in Parliament, and the government continues to back the industry, despite what is clearly an industry out of control with inadequate regulation. And the EPA is investigating. So here we are a month later, and all we know really is that they're investigating.
And like a lot of people eat salmon, do we know if diseased fish are... What's happening with the diseased fish? Is there a chance that they could be going to market?
The answer that the EPA gave a week or so ago was that that's not their job. It's not their job to monitor that. Someone else's job.
Certainly the dead fish are not going anywhere for human consumption.
Do you monitor that?
Do we monitor that? No, the company, we're the Environment Protection Authority, so we're looking after the environmental side of things, not the food side of things.
But we don't know who that is, and we don't know if these diseased fish are turning up on dinner plates.
Well, let's hope someone is monitoring it, but some more reassurance would be good.
I mean, that's a pretty lackluster response down in Tasmania, but it's the total opposite response we've seen from the federal government. So the Prime Minister obviously came down to Tasmania and pledged to protect the salmon industry with special laws, basically, that he's going to potentially introduce into Parliament next week. Can you tell me quickly about that? And then I want to ask you about the Maugean skate in particular and Macquarie Harbour, because those laws affect that. But what the Prime Minister has really intervened in a big way in this debate. Tell me about what he's proposing.
This is really serious, Ebony. The Prime Minister has said he will override an ongoing process and current national environment law to ensure that the salmon industry can continue in Macquarie Harbour. This Macquarie Harbour, 1/3 of it is World Heritage listed, and the Maugean skate itself is actually recognised for its World Heritage value because of its linkages to the dinosaurs. The idea, like the problem we are finding ourselves in is our national environment law is not doing enough to protect our threatened species and our World Heritage area. And now the Prime Minister is proposing to override those already inadequate regulations and protections in order to allow this industry to continue. Begs the question of what will be next.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about the plight of the Maugean skate. It's at risk of extinction. What's the impact of salmon farming in Macquarie Harbour, the only place where the Maugean skate lives?
The science could not be clearer. The Australian Government's own Department of Environment's website lists salmon farming as the primary threat to the Maugean skate. And we have heard again and again through Australian Government scientists that the skate is on the brink of extinction. Now, you can argue whether there's been a number of population estimates, whether it's a few hundred or a couple of thousand. That doesn't matter. The skate is still on the brink of extinction. There are not enough skate for its future to be secure in any way. So we know what the problem is. We also have advice from the Australian Government what needs to be done about it. 18 months ago now, the Australian Government said before that summer of 23-24 that fish farming needed to be either eliminated or significantly reduced in order to prevent the extinction of the skate. And here we are 18 months later, and there has been no reduction since that point in time.
And you wrote to the Environment Minister on behalf of the Australia Institute seeking basically a review of the decision that allowed salmon farming to expand in Macquarie Harbour. What's been the outcome of that, Eloise?
There is no outcome. So this whole problem could have been resolved 12 months ago. The law says she must make that decision as soon as practicable. What that decision's about is, the 2012 decision that allowed the expansion, that happened, 12, 13 years ago now. Since then, there is new scientific evidence available, peer-reviewed literature. This is as good as it gets in terms of knowledge and evidence of the impacts of salmon farming. And this has been published over a sequence of scientific papers over the last decade. We compiled that and we provided that evidence to the minister, and then she, based on that evidence, had to do a review of fish farming in the harbour. Now, she should have made that decision a long time ago. She's clearly well past anything that could be considered to be as soon as practicable. And as a result, this issue has just blown up into a big political bun fight, basically.
We've recently seen FOI documents that have been released that kind of detail this process and what has gone wrong and what the government knows or doesn't. Can you just tell us a little bit about what those FOI documents have revealed?
Look, we've had a major win race recently. The former independent Senator for South Australia, Rex Patrick, put in a Freedom of Information request about 18 months ago now for the material, the advice from the department to the Environment Minister at the time of when the reconsideration was first kicking off. And that was refused. And then it was refused. It was released in part with a lot of it very heavily redacted. Now, he is very passionate about transparency in government, and he fought it all the way to the appeal tribunal. And about a month ago, the member decided that the Australian Public Service had actually been acting unlawfully by withholding that information and refusing to make it public. And then just recently, those documents have been released. And they very clearly say that the likely outcome from the review is that fish farming should be called in as a controlled action under our national environment law and given further assessment.
So basically, those are Bombshell FOI documents that show the government clearly understands the depth of the problem, that the salmon industry kind of is in the crosshairs here as the main culprit, and that this really should have been dealt with a long time ago. Plus, they tried to keep it secret from the public. Is that a fair summary?
So yeah, exactly. And what that means, just for people who might not be so familiar with our national environment law, is when something gets called in, it means that there is the likelihood of a significant impact on a matter of national environmental significance. So obviously, world heritage is a matter of national environmental significance, as is a threatened species, a species that's threatened with extinction. So by the department saying 18 months ago to the minister, we think the likely outcome of the process that you're currently undertaking is that this activity is having a significant impact. That's the significance of that information. And that's what's been kept secret for the last year and a half.
Well, basically, it's been business as usual for the salmon industry.
Correct.
Just going on having that impact.
The other really important thing from that information is that there was a lot of really important information in those documents. But one of the other key pieces of information is that the department actually found 20 jobs would be affected by a potentially negative decision for the industry.
And how many jobs has the Tasmanian salmon industry been saying are at risk?
400.
Quite a disparity there between 20 jobs and 400 jobs.
Yep.
Right.
My government supports jobs, we support regional economic development, and we support sustainability. And this industry has a vital role to play.
So in this context, the Prime Minister is promising special laws to protect this industry, which is having a significant impact, we can kind of deduce from these FOI documents. How dangerous is this pledge of the Prime Minister's to introduce special legislation next week to bypass national environment laws to protect the salmon industry?
It's really dangerous. The ALP promised 3 years ago that they would strengthen our national environment laws. We had an independent review that said these laws are failing us as a country. We need to fix them. We need to strengthen protections so that we can look after our environment, which we all rely on. The idea that not only has the ALP abandoned that commitment, apparently, because they've failed to deliver on it, they are now actually going to undermine those weak protections with this legislation next week. It's enormous. And if they're going to do it for one industry, what's to stop them from doing it to another industry?
Yeah, like allowing, I guess, more logging of native forests in protected areas where there's endangered species, or there's plenty of other huge impacts on the environment and special laws that benefit corporate interests. You know, we know with laws like this, it's always the thin end of the wedge. It's never the last time laws like this get used, is it?
The fossil fuel industry springs to mind.
As well, yeah. So when we talk about protecting the environment and the impact in particular that the salmon industry is having on the skate in Macquarie Harbour, can you tell us about some of those environmental impacts? What is the salmon industry doing in Macquarie Harbour that is so damaging to the Maugean skate?
It's quite a complex bit of science, so just bear with me. Macquarie Harbour is a really special environment. It's a big harbour, it's a big estuary. It's where the Franklin River that was saved 40 years ago, it's where it flows into the sea. It's absolutely beautiful. It's World Heritage, as I said. It's quite unique in that it has these major rivers coming into it, but quite a small opening to the ocean. And natural replenishment of oxygen is through that very small opening to the ocean. Now, when salmon farming, when feces and urine from the fish and some excess feed, when that deteriorates in the water, it goes through a process called eutrophication, which essentially sucks the oxygen out of the water. And it results in really quite serious oxygen depletion. So there's been parts of the harbour where there's been almost no oxygen in the water. And obviously that affects everything, not just the skate, but everything. So there's been dead zones identified in the harbour. And when there's a good year, you get natural oxygen replenishment from the ocean, but that doesn't happen every year. But what does happen with salmon farming is there is a constant drawdown in oxygen just by them being there, just through the process of farming a lot of fish and then producing a lot of waste in the system.
And so essentially that waste and the other byproducts of this industry is depleting the oxygen in the whole harbour.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
We're actually going to publish some new research on this, Ebony, so everyone have a look at our website over the next couple of days, where we've actually compared the amount of nitrogen pollution from the fish poo in the harbour to the equivalent of how much sewage comes out of a city like Hobart.
So, Eloise, you're coming to Canberra next week to try and talk to the Parliament about these really dangerous laws that the Prime Minister wants to introduce that will essentially weaken protections for the environment. What is the key thing that actually needs to happen here to protect the skate?
We need to stop fish farming in Macquarie Harbour. It's quite simple. There's a process we have to go through to get there. The current review, the next step in that would be for a more in-depth ecological impact assessment to happen. But for that to happen, first of all, the Minister needs to make a decision on the reconsideration. She needs to say, yep, I'm calling this in. This is a controlled action. And we're going to do the following assessment to look into it in more detail. And we're confident that the science will find that the science is clear that at the end of that process, we need to stop fish farming in the harbour. It's just not the right place for it. It's as simple as that.
Is there anything else you'd like people to know before we finish up, Eloise?
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting developments happening around the world with open ocean fish farming. For example, the Washington state in the US has banned salmon farming. So has British Columbia in Canada, and so has Argentina. You know, we should be thinking about this in Australia and whether or not we want to stop this harmful industry from in destroying our coastal environments.
Well, thanks very much for joining us on the show today, Eloise.
Thanks for having me, Ebony.
And the Australia Institute has a petition to end salmon farming in Macquarie Harbour. It's up on our website and you can find that and sign that and help us in the fight to protect the Maugean skate from extinction. And we would love to hear your thoughts on the show today. You can reach out to us via email at podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au, or you can find us on social media. We're at australiainstitute.org.au on Blue Sky and at the Oz Institute with an AUS on Instagram and Twitter. Our theme music is by Jonathan McPhee from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.